The most dangerous woman in the room is never the loudest one. She's the one smiling. Picture something. Picture a woman standing in the middle of a $2 million penthouse in Buckhead, Atlanta, wearing a dress that cost more than most people's car payments, holding a glass of Whispering Angel rosé, watching her 10-year-old daughter cry. Not sniffling, not whimpering, crying. The full body, chest heaving, shoulders collapsing kind of crying that a child does when they've been broken in front of an audience. Now picture the woman causing it. Picture her laughing. That woman was my sister, Farah, and the little girl weeping into the sleeve of her party dress, that was my daughter, Nadia. And me, I was the woman standing there holding my wine like it was the only thing keeping me on my feet. Let me back up, because what happened that Sunday afternoon at my mother's annual fall gathering, what the family calls the Langford affair, like we're some kind of dynasty, didn't start at the party. It started 26 years ago, the day I was born and Farah decided she didn't want a sister. It just took until that Sunday for the rest of the world to finally see what I had always known about my blood family. And it took my daughter's tears for me to finally stop pretending that any of it was okay. My name is Selena Langford Voss. I'm 34 years old. I live in a high-rise in Buckhead with my husband, Ronan, who is a corporate attorney, and our daughter, Nadia, who is brilliant and sensitive and draws horses in every margin of every notebook she owns. We have a life that looks, from the outside, like a highlight reel. Ronan drives a black G-Wagon. I run my own interior design firm, Voss & Co., that has done 7-figure projects across Atlanta, Charleston, and Nashville. We summer in Kiowa. We holiday in Aspen. We give to charities. We go to the right dinners. We are, by every external measure, doing exceptionally well. But money doesn't insulate you from family. That's the part nobody tells you. My mother, Constance Langford, is 70 years old and looks 55. She has that particular brand of Southern beauty that ages like whiskey, deeper, richer, more potent. She lives in a 6-bedroom colonial in Tuxedo Park that she inherited from her own mother and has filled with antiques, fresh flowers every week, and a suffocating amount of expectation. Constance believes in appearances above all else. She believes the family name is an asset, that how you present yourself is who you are, and that weakness, emotional, financial, social, is a private matter that should never, under any circumstances, be aired in company. My sister Farah is 37. She is beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful. You notice them, you're drawn to them, and then they cut you and you wonder how you didn't see it coming. Farah runs a lifestyle brand called Farah & Co. Yes, she took my naming convention. Yes, I noticed. Yes, it was intentional. And she has 200,000 Instagram followers who believe she is the pinnacle of gracious Southern living. She does cooking reels, she does home tours, she does wellness walks through Piedmont Park in cashmere joggers. Her comment sections are full of women calling her an inspiration. I have seen her make my niece eat a salad and call it dinner because there were people coming over and she didn't want the kitchen to smell like cooking. The party was held on the last Sunday in October. The leaves on the oak trees outside my mother's house were doing that spectacular Georgia thing, gold and burgundy still clinging. Constance had hired a caterer. She'd brought in extra staff. There were 40 people in that house, mostly family, some of my mother's church friends, a couple of Ferris social climbers. Nadia wore a navy velvet dress with white lace at the collar. She had begged me to let her wear her hair down, so it fell in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked like a painting. I should have left before dessert was served. I should have trusted the thing in my stomach that had been turning over since we walked in the door. It started so casually, the way these things always do, the way an avalanche starts, not with a bang, but with one small shift of snow. We were gathered in the formal sitting room after dinner, the kind of post-meal settling where the adults are warm with wine and food, and the children are starting to get restless. Nadia had been talking to my cousin Bria's daughter, a 12-year-old named Peyton, about horses. Nadia's obsession, her whole personality at that age. She was lit up the way she only gets when she's talking about something she loves. Her hands were moving, her cheeks were pink. She was so happy. And then Farah drifted over to the group the way she always drifts, like she's not trying to make an entrance, but somehow the light always catches her. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, and she said, with that smile she has, the one that looks like warmth but operates like a scalpel, "Nadia, honey, what are you even talking about? You don't know anything about horses. You've never even ridden one." And then she laughed. Not a mean laugh. That's the thing about Farah. She doesn't laugh mean. She laughs like she's in on a joke that everybody else is about to get. She looked at Peyton and the other kids and said, "She's always making things up, isn't she? Bless her heart." And the kids, they were kids, they laughed because Farah is an adult, and adults set the social temperature in a room, and she had just told them that laughing was the appropriate response. Nadia's face changed in real time. I watched it happen from across the room. I watched the light go out. She looked down at her shoes, her chin started trembling. And Farah, my sister, this woman who has known Nadia since she was born, who has held that child, who has been in our home and at our table, Farah kept going. "It's okay, Nadia, we all exaggerate sometimes." Another laugh, lighter this time, dismissive. My daughter was weeping, my sister was laughing, and every single person in that room saw it. I don't know what I looked like in that moment. I know what I felt, something cold moving through me, something very quiet and very certain. I set my glass down on the side table, I walked across that room, and I did not raise my voice, I did not point fingers, I did not make a scene. I simply reached Nadia's side, took her hand, and I said quietly, "Get your cardigan, baby, we're leaving." Nadia looked up at me with those swollen eyes and nodded. She knew. She always knows. We were almost to the front door when my mother materialized. Constance has this way of appearing, like she doesn't walk through rooms, she manifests in them. She was standing in the foyer in her cream St. John suit, with her reading glasses perched on top of her head and her arms crossed. She looked at me the way she's always looked at me, like I'm a problem she never quite solved. She said, and I will hear these words for the rest of my life, "Don't you walk out of here and embarrass this family over a child's silly feelings." And when I kept walking, when I reached for the door handle, my mother said, loud enough for the room to hear, loud enough that it echoed in the marble foyer, "Get lost and take this trash with you." Nadia heard her. I know she heard her because I felt her hand tighten in mine. I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I opened that door and I walked my daughter out into the October evening, and I put her in the car and I drove away. And the whole way home, Nadia was quiet in the back seat, looking out the window, and I was quiet in the front seat, looking at the road, and we were both very still with the weight of what had just happened. But here's the part nobody saw coming. Here's the part that changes everything. I had been waiting for this day for 8 years. Not that moment specifically, you can't script the exact shape of someone's cruelty, but I had known, with the kind of bone-deep certainty that you develop when you've grown up as the second daughter in a house where love is conditional and approval is currency, that there would come a day when Farah went too far, when she touched something I could not let go. I had been quietly, patiently building for that day. Because here is the thing about me that my family has never understood. I look soft. I was always the crier, the sensitive one, the one who took things to heart. Farah is the one who seems tough. Constance is the one who seems powerful. And I am, in their minds, the one who can be pushed. What they never counted on is what you can build when you're invisible, what you can accumulate when people aren't watching, what you learn when you've spent 34 years being dismissed. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:45. I was in the kitchen making Nadia's overnight oats, listening to her get ready for school upstairs, and my phone buzzed on the marble counter. Farah. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. My mother's name this time. I set the phone face down and finished the oats. By 9 a.m., when Nadia was safely on the school bus, I had 14 missed calls between the two of them. By 10, Farah was on my doorstep. She wasn't in cashmere joggers, she wasn't polished, her hair was loose, and she wasn't wearing her usual full face, just concealer and a sweep of mascara, and she looked rattled. Farah doesn't rattle. I have never in my life seen my sister rattled. She had her hands clasped in front of her like she was about to say grace, and she said, before I could even open the door fully, "Selena, please, you cannot do this. You don't understand what you could ruin." And right behind her, pulling up in her silver Lexus with her hazards on like she was responding to an emergency, was my mother. Constance, the woman who had told me to get lost and called my child trash, standing on my front step with her handbag clutched at her chest like a shield, saying, "Please, Selena, please don't ruin our lives." 24 hours ago, I was trash. Now they were begging. That tells you everything you need to know about power. I stood in my doorway and I looked at these two women, my mother and my sister, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. I had expected satisfaction. I had expected coldness. What I actually felt was grief, not for what was happening now, but for what had never been. For all the years I had spent trying to earn something from these two women that was never going to be offered. For the little girl I had been trying so hard, and for the little girl upstairs in her bedroom who had inherited my position in this family's hierarchy without ever being given a choice. I said, "You need to leave." Not loudly, not dramatically. Farah said, "You don't understand. This isn't just about the party, Selena. This is about—" And I said, "I know exactly what this is about." Because I did. I had known for 8 years, and now they knew that I knew. That was the shift they had felt. That was why they were standing on my doorstep at 10 in the morning undone. I closed the door. I stood in my foyer and I listened to them ring the bell twice more and then silence. I went to my office, a glass-walled room off the main living space, where I keep my project files, my design boards, and a fireproof safe bolted to the floor behind my credenza, and I sat down. I opened my laptop, I poured myself a coffee, and I began. Because what Farah and my mother didn't know, what they never thought to ask, was what I had been doing for the last 8 years while they were busy performing their perfect lives, and what I knew about both of them would burn everything down. Let me tell you about the summer of 2016. Nadia was 2. Ronan and I had just bought our first home, not the penthouse, a house in Morningside. Modest by our current standards, but it was ours, and I had stripped every room down and rebuilt it with my own design sensibility, and I was so proud of it. Farah had come to stay for a week under the guise of helping with the baby. What she actually did was go through my files, not my personal journals or my emails, my business files. I had been in the early stages of launching Voss & Co. I had 3 prospective clients, a business plan, a brand identity I'd spent months developing. When my first client launched their renovation the following spring, Farah launched Farah & Co. 2 months later. Same concept, different city. She poached my vendor relationships. She used 2 of my proposed client pitches nearly verbatim. I didn't confront her then. I was a new mother. I was building a business with a baby on my hip. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself she would burn herself out. What I actually did, quietly, on evenings after Nadia was asleep, was start documenting. Not in an obsessive way, just methodically. The way I document everything. Design plans, project timelines, vendor agreements. I documented what I had, what she'd taken, and what she'd built from it. I kept records. Dated records. Then in 2019, I learned something else, something that had nothing to do with business, something that involved my mother, a real estate transaction, and a man named Preston Holt, a developer my family had done business with for years, who had become, I discovered, significantly more than a business associate to Constance. My father had passed in 2018. My mother was grief-stricken, or so she performed it. But the paperwork I came across, accidentally, through a mutual attorney, don't ask me to explain the legal chain because it would take all day, told a different story about the timeline, about when things had started, about what my mother had known and what she had hidden while my father was still alive. My mother, who told my daughter she was trash, had been living a lie for the better part of a decade. And Farah knew. That was the real kicker. Farah had known since at least 2017, and she had used that knowledge not to protect my father, not to confront my mother, but to secure her own position. Farah and Constance had been operating in a quiet, unspoken arrangement for years. Constance's silence on Farah's less than ethical business practices, Farah's silence on Constance's arrangement with Preston. They were each other's insurance policy. They had constructed a perfect little closed circuit of mutual protection, and I was the variable outside the system, the one who could upset everything, the one they'd always needed to keep small. After I closed the door that morning, I called my attorney. Then I called the journalist, a woman named Kezia Odom at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, who had been following the Holt real estate portfolio for 2 years. I didn't tell Kezia everything. I just confirmed one thing she'd been trying to nail down. Then I made one more call, this one to a woman named Bet Samuels, who had been the CFO of Farah's company for 3 years before Farah replaced her with someone younger and cheaper. Bet had tried to tell me something once, at a cocktail party. I hadn't been ready to hear it. I was ready now. I hadn't even played my first card yet, and they were already begging. The question is, what did they think I had, and were they right to be afraid? Revenge isn't about making them pay, it's about making sure they can never take from you again. There is a particular kind of silence that settles over a house when the woman running it has made up her mind, not the silence of emptiness, the silence of intention. For the 3 weeks following the party, I moved through my life the way I always move through a design project in its final stages, quietly, deliberately, touching each element with precision. I went to work, I picked Nadia up from school, I cooked dinner, I went to the gym, I smiled at my neighbors in the elevator, and every single evening, after Nadia was in bed and the apartment was still, I sat in my office with the door closed and I worked. Ronan knew something was happening. He's an attorney. He reads rooms for a living. He came to my office door on the 4th night and leaned against the frame and said, "Selena, what are you doing?" I looked up from my laptop. I said, "Something I should have done years ago." He came in and sat down across from me, and I told him everything. Not just the party, everything. The files, the business theft, what I knew about my mother and Preston Holt, what Bet Samuels had told me. Ronan is not a reactive man. He sat there and he listened, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" I said, "Most of it? 8 years." He looked at me like he was seeing something he'd missed before. He said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" That's the man I married. Not because he agreed with everything I was doing, because he asked what I needed. What I needed from Ronan was his corporate law expertise applied to one specific document, a licensing agreement that Farah had filed in 2017 for a signature design element of Farah & Co., a pattern called Southern Lattice that I had sitting in a dated digital file from February 2016, originated and documented in full. The irony is that Southern Lattice was what had made Farah's brand recognizable. It was the motif on her packaging, her website header, her merch. It was on 200,000 Instagram profiles. It was Farah's identity, and it was mine. I had never filed for it because I'd been too overwhelmed, too new, too trusting. Farah had known. She had filed it. She had built an empire on it. And now Ronan's firm was going to write her a letter. The letter was not threatening. That's an amateur move. Threatening letters give people time to circle the wagons. The letter was informative. It outlined the documentation, the dates, the discrepancy, and our intention to pursue a formal claim. It arrived at Farah's office on a Tuesday. I know the exact moment she received it because at 11:47 that morning, her assistant called my assistant asking if there was a chance of a private conversation between the sisters before anything was escalated. My assistant, bless her, said she would pass along the message. I did not call back that day. I let Farah sit with it, because fear, properly applied, is its own kind of leverage. While Ronan was handling the legal correspondence, I was dealing with the second thread. The Preston Holt situation was more delicate because it involved my mother's personal life, and however furious I was at Constance, I was not interested in destroying her. I was interested in the truth. There's a difference. What I had wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of a financial arrangement that had begun while my father was alive and ill, a transfer of a property asset, a beach house in Sea Island that my father believed he'd sold in a standard transaction, into a holding company that, when you traced the ownership structure 3 layers deep, was connected to Preston Holt. My father had been told it was a development deal. It was not a development deal. It was my mother moving an asset without my father's full understanding of where it was going, facilitated by a man she was involved with. My father was not alive to know this. He had died believing his finances were in order, that his wife was grieving alongside him, that the beach house had been sold in a clean transaction. He had died trusting Constance, and Constance had let him die trusting her. That is the part that I had spent 2 years trying to decide what to do with, because there is no undoing it. There is no justice that brings my father back or gives him the truth while he can still feel something about it. The only question was what happened to the truth now. And then Bet Samuels sent me an email with an attachment, and the question answered itself. Bet had been Farah's CFO for 3 years. She had left quietly. Farah's version was that Bet had decided to move on, and Bet, under a non-disclosure agreement, had not corrected that version. But an NDA has limits. It cannot cover fraud. What Bet had, what she had been sitting on, what she had tried to whisper to me at that cocktail party 2 years ago, was evidence that Farah had been running a portion of Farah & Co.'s revenue through a shell structure that funneled a percentage to a separate account. Not a personal savings account, a shared account, shared with Constance Langford. My mother was on the books of my sister's company as a creative consultant. She had received, over 4 years, just over $200,000 in consulting fees. My mother, who lived in the Tuxedo Park house and attended church on Sundays and told my daughter she was trash, had been participating in what was at minimum a tax documentation irregularity and at maximum revenue fraud. I sat with that attachment for 3 days. I read it 4 times. I sent it to a forensic accountant he knew. The forensic accountant confirmed what I suspected. Then I called Kezia Odom. I want to be clear about something. What I did next was not about cruelty. It was about consequences. There is a difference, and it matters. I met Kezia at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland on a Thursday afternoon. I brought a folder. Not everything, just enough. I gave her the documentation on the property transfer. I confirmed the ownership chain on the holding company. I told her who Preston Holt was in relation to my mother and the approximate timeline. I did not give her the financial records from Farah's company. That was a separate matter, and it was going to be handled separately. Kezia was professional and careful, and she understood what she was looking at. She said she needed to verify independently before anything could run. I said, of course. I said, take your time. I left the coffee shop and drove home and picked Nadia up from school, and we went to the park, and she ran around in the November chill, and I pushed her on the swings, and I thought, this is what I'm doing this for. Not for me, for her. Because here is the thing I had watched happen my whole life. My mother and my sister operated with impunity because the women around them, me, my aunts, Bet, my father, absorbed the consequences of their behavior without pushing back. Farah had laughed at my daughter at a family party because she had always been able to laugh at things and walk away clean. Constance had called my child trash because she had always been able to say vicious things under the cover of family and have everyone pretend it hadn't happened. The system worked because everyone played their assigned role. I had been assigned the role of the one who absorbs. I was done absorbing. The legal letter to Farah produced results within 10 days. Her attorney called Ronan's office and asked about the possibility of a settlement conversation. Ronan said we were open to discussion. The conversation happened over 2 sessions. Ronan and Farah's attorney, no Farah, no me. What came out of it was this. Farah would relinquish the Southern Lattice trademark. She would pay a licensing fee for past commercial use, not a punitive number, a fair one, calculated on documented revenue. And she would provide a written acknowledgement, private but legally binding, that the design element had originated with me. She did not admit to intentional theft. Her attorney called it a resolution of competing claims. I accepted that language. I didn't need her confession. I needed the truth to exist in a document. The Kezia story ran 6 weeks later. It was not on the front page. It was not a scandal in the tabloid sense. Atlanta is not a tabloid city. It ran in the business section, a carefully reported piece on the Holt development portfolio and certain financial arrangements that had raised questions in property transfer records. My mother's name appeared twice in the context of the Sea Island transaction. Preston Holt's attorney issued a statement. My mother made no comment. Farah, to her credit, or her survival instinct, made no comment. The story was read by exactly the people who needed to read it: the church ladies, the Tuxedo Park neighbors, the social circles where Constance Langford had built her reputation over 50 years. Within a week, I heard through a cousin that Constance had canceled her appearance at the Friends of the Library luncheon, that she was not feeling well. She wasn't sick, she was embarrassed. For the first time in her life, she was embarrassed instead of me. I did not call my mother. I did not call Farah. For the first 2 weeks after the story ran, I let the silence sit between us. And then, on a Wednesday evening in December, I called Constance. She picked up after 2 rings. I could hear in her voice that she'd been waiting. I said, "Mom, I want to come over. Not to fight, just to talk." She said, very quietly, "All right." I drove over that Friday afternoon, alone. No Ronan, no Nadia, just me. The house was immaculate as always. Constance was in the formal sitting room, the same room where Nadia had cried, and she was wearing a blue cashmere twin set, and her hair was set, and she looked, despite everything, composed. That is my mother. She composes herself the way other people breathe. We sat across from each other. She didn't offer me tea. I didn't ask. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and then Constance said, "I'm sorry for what I said about Nadia." Just that. No qualifiers. No, "but you provoked," or "you know how Farah is." She said it straight, and I think it cost her something real. I said, "I know you are." Because I did. I know my mother loves Nadia. I know my mother loves me. That is the brutal, complicated truth of this family. The love is real. It's just wrapped in so many layers of dysfunction and ego and old wounds that it comes out as its opposite. I said, "Mom, I need you to understand something. This isn't about the party. The party was the last thing, not the only thing." She looked at her hands. I said, "I need Nadia to grow up knowing that there are consequences for cruelty, even inside a family, especially inside a family, because the people inside your family are the ones who shape who you think you are." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Where did I go wrong with Farah?" I said, "You made her believe she was exempt." She didn't argue. That conversation lasted 2 hours. It was the most honest conversation I have ever had with my mother in 34 years. I did not forgive Constance that day. Forgiveness is not a decision you make in an afternoon. But I began. I opened the door. That was enough for then. My mother was going to have to live with what the Kezia story had revealed. Not the legal exposure, the personal one, the social cost, the loss of the image she had spent her whole life building. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything to Constance. And she was going to have to rebuild in full view of the people who mattered to her. I was not going to carry that weight for her, but I was not going to make it heavier either. Farah took longer. Farah is not built for accountability the way Constance, in her structured way, is. Farah's first move was to go quiet on social media for 2 weeks. For a woman with 200,000 followers, that was practically a public breakdown. Her second move was to have her publicist float a story about her stepping back for mental health. Her third move was to call me directly. No attorney, no warning, on a Sunday night in January. I almost didn't pick up. I did. She said, "I know you did this. I know you planned it." I said, "Yes." There was a long silence. She said, "Why didn't you just come to me?" I said, "Farah, you were laughing." She didn't have an answer for that. And in the silence that followed, I heard something I had never heard from my sister before. She was crying. Not the performative kind, the real kind, the kind Nadia had done in that sitting room. I sat with it. I didn't rush to make her feel better. I let it be what it was. And then I said, "If you want to talk, really talk, not manage me, I'm here." She said, "I don't know how to do that." I said, "I know, me neither, but we could figure it out." She didn't come to that immediately. It took 3 more months, a therapist, and a conversation that happened on a restaurant patio in Inman Park in March, but it started on that phone call, the real sister conversation we had never had. I don't have a tidy ending for Farah. People are not tidy. What I have is a sister who is in therapy for the first time, who has begun to dismantle some of the competition and entitlement she built her life on, who called Nadia on her birthday and said, "I'm sorry I was mean to you, sweetheart. I was wrong, and it wasn't funny." And Nadia, who is 10 and generous and does not carry grudges the way adults do, said, "It's okay, Aunt Farah." And Farah said, "It isn't, actually, but thank you." That was a new sentence for Farah, a real one. As for Nadia, my girl, my whole purpose, she knows pieces of this, but not all. She is 10. What she knows is this, that her mother did not let it go, that there were consequences, that the adults who hurt her were held to account. I know that the research on children and family dynamics says that what shapes a child is not whether bad things happen, but whether a trusted adult responds to bad things with protection and clarity. I know that what Nadia saw on that October afternoon, her grandmother's cruelty, her aunt's casual viciousness, was real, and it registered, and it would have stayed with her differently if I had absorbed it. But what happened after that afternoon was also real. Her mother held her hand and walked out. Her mother did not shout or sob or perform. Her mother moved with purpose. Her mother handled it. That is what Nadia will carry. Boss & Co. had its biggest revenue quarter in history in the first quarter of the following year. Partly the trademark resolution, partly momentum, partly the fact that when you stop spending emotional energy managing your family's chaos and redirecting it into your work becomes extraordinary. I hired 2 new designers. I took on a project in Nashville that I'd been scared of, a full hotel interior, 50 rooms, a lobby, 2 restaurants. I said yes. It is the best work I have ever done. My father used to say, "A Langford stands, Selena." He meant it as a call to dignity, to not crumbling. I spent 20 years thinking that standing meant staying in the room, staying quiet, staying the soft one. What I learned in the year after my daughter cried at a family party is that standing has nothing to do with staying. Standing is about knowing what you're worth. Standing is about being willing to walk out of rooms that cost you more than they give. Standing is about building something that cannot be taken because you were paying attention when nobody thought you were. I stood. Finally. Completely. I stood. The morning after I had that long conversation with my mother, I was in the kitchen again. Same marble counter, same coffee. Nadia came downstairs in her pajamas with a sketchbook under her arm. She'd been drawing horses again. She's always drawing horses. And she climbed onto the bar stool and looked at me and said, "Mama, are we okay?" And I said, "Yes, baby." She said, "Like for real?" I said, "Like for real." She nodded, satisfied, and opened her sketchbook and started to draw. And I stood there watching her, this child who is brilliant and sensitive and marks every margin with horses. And I thought, this is the whole thing, this moment, this kitchen, this quiet. They called my daughter trash, but look what she made me become.
If this story moved you, even just a little, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to defend your truth when no one else believed you? Drop a comment below. I read everyone. And if you felt something while listening, if this reminded you of your own journey, or gave you a new way to see family, please give the video a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. Share it with someone who needs to hear that blood isn't the only thing that makes a family. And if you're new here or just passing through, hit that subscribe button. I've got more stories coming, real ones, raw ones, about love, identity, motherhood, healing, and the messy, beautiful ways life surprises us. Thanks for watching, and remember, truth is never something to be ashamed of. Before you click away, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm grateful you spent these moments with me.